Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation, which is designed to provide you with a closer look at how video surveillance can help drive a proactive approach to campus safety. My name is Rihanna Daniels-Heil, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items for everyone, and also how you can participate in today's session. Right now, all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you'd like to ask any questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the questions area of the attendee interface. This is located at the top right of your computer screen. Simply type in your question and click send, and at the end of the presentation, we will address as many questions as we have time for. After the completion of today's presentation, this webinar will be available for on-demand viewing on the Oncam and Pivot3 websites. We'll be sure to send that link out to everyone once we've wrapped up today. So I'd like to introduce today's speakers. On today's call, we have Jumbi Edelbrom and Brandon Reich. Jumbi is currently the Regional President of the Americas for Oncam. In this role, he is responsible for all sales, marketing, and business development activities in the Americas. Prior to Oncam, Jumbi served as Director of Business Development for the Security Division of Samsung Techland and as Vice President of Business Development for Next Level Security Systems. He has more than 20 years of industry expertise and is a frequent speaker and media contributor. Brandon is the Senior Director of Surveillance Solutions at Pivot3. Brandon came to Pivot3 in 2014 from Honeywell Security Group, where he led the product marketing and global strategy functions for the commercial and enterprise technology business unit. Prior to Honeywell, Brandon spent 10 years leading a security consulting and engineering firm providing services to government, institutional, and corporate clients. So with that, I will pass things over to Jumbi.
Great, thanks Rihanna. Hello everyone, and thank you for getting on this webinar. This is obviously a pretty urgent issue that we're dealing with right now, so this webinar is quite timely. So campus security has really become a big issue. It has been in the past few decades, in fact, but just even in the last few years, things like shooting, violence, sexual offenses, etc. This is just a short list on this screen, but obviously there's a even longer list of incidents that can happen on campuses, both K through 12 and higher ed. I just snagged this map of the internet. This is campus incidents since, I think, 2013, with the ones in red indicating multiple fatalities and the ones in yellow, a single fatality. So if you go back, a few more years, this map looks pretty crowded with all kinds of incidents. And again, these are just shooting incidents. As I mentioned, obviously, there's a bunch of other stuff that people have to deal with on campuses. So what are some of the key challenges of campus surveillance? I mean, in some ways, some of the challenges obviously that campuses face in terms of safety, security, risk mitigation are similar to, other segments within security, but in some ways, campuses are pretty unique. First of all, there are a lot of large campuses and spread out campuses, both actually K through 12 as well as higher ed, but especially higher ed. So everywhere where students and personnel have access, those areas do need to be covered by some kind of surveillance for safety and security. Another huge issue on campuses especially is privacy. And, I'll give you an example. In a big higher ed institution that I was working with recently, had a bunch of theft in one of the departments. And even after a whole bunch of laptops, computers, etc. was stolen, they were having a debate about whether or not they wanted cameras. Because, campuses are, they do want to be open, free environments, and they don't want, surveillance per se. But I think the attitudes are changing quite a bit in the sense that it's not that necessarily people don't want to be seen in video because that somehow curtails their privacy. It's more that they don't want the campus to appear like an area that has security issues to the extent that you're going to put a whole bunch of cameras for surveillance. Of course, urban campuses, and I know these well. I actually live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which has a whole number of urban campuses in and around the Cambridge and Boston area. I mean, those pose pretty unique challenges because campus buildings are interspersed with, just city buildings and city facilities. So there's challenges both in terms of keeping campus personnel secure, but also in terms of communicating about incidents with local police departments, etc. Then, of course, especially on the higher ed side, people actually tend to forget that a campus is not just, classes and labs. They actually contain a whole bunch of different applications on campus. For example, retail. There are bookstores, clothing stores, etc. Museums, and I could tell you some of these campus museums have very valuable artwork that needs to be protected. Then, of course, there are large sports arenas, and as we know, those are sometimes hotspots for incidents. Football games, internal arenas for hockey, etc. Then libraries, food service, etc. There's just a whole gamut of different kinds of applications that could exist even on a single campus. The other thing we keep hearing in terms of challenges is that lots of campus security personnel want to be able to walk around the campus and yet access cameras and surveil different areas of the campus simultaneously. So there is a big and growing need for mobile applications, both for actually being able to look at the system, but also manage them. So campus security personnel can really be able to walk around the campuses, keep an eye on things, events, etc., but at the same time be able to access cameras from any other part of campus. And then, of course, the last big one, and this is especially true for K through 12, but also for higher ed. I mean, budgets are very limited. K through 12 has perhaps, especially in public schools, unique challenges with raising money for installing equipment, upgrading equipment, etc. K through 12, high school that I recently talked to has 15-year-old cameras and surveillance equipment, and they just haven't managed to raise the budget locally to do the upgrades. So, that continues to be a challenge in the campus environment. So going on to the next slide. So, Oncam actually makes what we call omnidirectional or 360-degree fisheye cameras. And, these are in some ways ideally suited to these kinds of environments, and they address some of the challenges that campuses face in a pretty unique way. So first big one, of course, is that 360-degree cameras cover large areas. So for example, what you see on the right is a large cafeteria with a camera that's a small 5-megapixel camera, which pretty much covers the whole cafeteria. And in the campus environment, there's really not that much need necessarily to identify individuals as much as there is need for total situational awareness, so to speak, over the large areas. Secondly, these fisheye cameras are extremely discreet and unobtrusive. They come in a variety of different form factors. The one that's shown here is literally 4 inches across and 1 inch thick. It could, pass off as any other kind of device. But if you even need more discreet, there is stuff that you can basically hide with only the lens showing. So it doesn't really give you the perception of being surveilled, where at the same time, you actually get very good quality video. The other interesting application, which keeps coming up is, especially for things like campus events, etc. 2 or 3 security guys might want to keep an eye on different parts of the event simultaneously, which they can do with a 360-degree camera. So unlike a pan-tilt zoom camera, if one person takes control, everybody else pretty much gets cut out. Here, users can actually look simultaneously at different parts of the image. And the same thing going after the fact, retrieving video from stored images, you can actually go back and have the same functionality, and you can PTZ around in this 360 image from the stored video. So in case you miss something live, you can go back and look at it after the fact. Sorry, I think I skipped one too many. So this is just views, just to give you a kind of an example of what a 360-degree camera in a real life environment looks like. So as you can see on the top right, there's a 360-degree view, and the other images are from different parts of that view. So you can preset those. There are areas of interest, like, for example, entrances, exits, etc., where at the same time, you still get the 360 view. So in case that you don't have part of the view displayed, you can, again, still go back into the stored video and look at any other part of the image. Oops, I keep bumping it twice. So this is just an example of the kinds of products that Oncam has. We really have a range of both hardware and software products that go into many different applications within a campus environment. And we also have software that is actually used by our video management system partners to integrate into their own software. So they can integrate the software into their applications and give you exactly the kinds of capabilities that I mentioned. And most importantly, we have a mobile app that a lot of campus personnel are now using. Like I said, they can walk around campus and at the same time access video from any camera anywhere on campus. The cameras can also store the video. So in case there's some kind of network outage, or in some cases, actually, we have campus personnel using these cameras in remote locations where they don't have access to the camera being hooked up to their back-end VMS system. So they actually use the camera in wireless mode and store video directly on the SD card and access it via the mobile app. And the mobile app, which is called OnView 360, if any of you download it either for a tablet or a phone, you can basically use it just using touch commands. And then if you shake the device, it goes back to the original 360. So it's a very user-friendly and very engaging application. And what we find is, rather than looking at just a static camera image, when people have a 360-degree image that they can play around with, they're actually much more engaged. So in terms of where this technology is going in the future, these are just some of the video analytic applications that will be available shortly on these 360 cameras. One which is tracking, of course. And, this has become a big issue on campuses, especially when a particular individual, worst case active shooter or someone like that, needs to be tracked across campus to see where they go, what they do, etc. This capability becomes quite interesting. Then there's counting, which again, in the campus environment, we find applications like people want to know how many people go into a facility or an event, because in case there's an emergency, you want to make sure that everyone that's gone in actually comes out. So you can count people both going in and out of a particular facility. Recognizing when crowds gather is another big application on campus, because there are areas on campus where they really wouldn't want a lot of people to gather, but even just crowds gathering any part of campus, could be a protest or something, people do want to know as soon as that happens. And heat mapping. This is more for campus retail or museum environments where they want to figure out how students are using these, how the public uses their museum, open facilities, etc. So that's basically just the overview of how this 360-degree technology can be applied in campus environments. So now I'll turn it back over to Rihanna and Brandon.
Thanks, Jambi. Appreciate it. A lot of these things that you discussed in your presentation, from the growth of video analytics and obviously the increase in the number of cameras, are things that Brandon is very familiar with. So at this point, I'll hand over the presentation to Brandon, and then we'll address questions at the end.
Okay, thank you, Rihanna. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and Jambi for giving that introduction as well. So, as Rihanna mentioned, my name is Brandon Reich. I'm the Senior Director of Surveillance Solutions here at Pivot3. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the challenges that institutions are facing on a day-in, day-out basis, building a little bit on what Jambi talked about. And then I want to talk about the implications that has on your video technology infrastructure. So think about servers and storage and some of the underlying technology infrastructure that runs all of these systems. And I want to address how you can take advantage of some of the latest trends in the world of IT to help ensure that your systems are running properly and smoothly. So, as Jambi talked about earlier, we all know that educational institutions are facing a really increasing risk profile. We've seen lots of very high-profile and some not so high-profile incidents that have really emphasized the greater risks and, in some cases, the vulnerabilities that all of our facilities and our institutions can be prone to. And that has led to really an increase in public demand for improved security solutions at every type of educational institution. Now, we know that schools and school systems and college and university campuses, of course, want to ensure the security and the safety of all of their stakeholders, but they're also primarily here to deliver quality education, and they constantly have to balance that need between providing a highly secure facility, which may not necessarily be conducive to open interaction amongst the population and within our educational environment, and our ability to deliver a really quality educational experience. Now, additionally, we're seeing advancements in technology, some of which Jambi has been talking about today already, and particularly in the world of video surveillance. And while these technology advancements can solve some of our problems, they can also in some ways add to the challenges as well. So regardless of that, we're seeing institutions across the country now adopting video surveillance really at the fastest rate in history. While most facilities and campuses have some form of video already, in fact, we've seen numbers around 9 out of every 10 educational facilities have some form of video in place. Virtually the vast majority of them now continue to grow these systems and expand, and are planning to do so over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. And they're really starting to take cues now from the law enforcement community, looking at technologies such as body cameras, body-worn cameras, looking at things like public and private partnerships, and now enabling the ability to share video with first responders, whether that be a local law enforcement agency, maybe an emergency response team like a fire department, or an on-campus public safety type of environment. And this really helps to improve the overall situational awareness and our ability to respond to and mitigate incidents as they're occurring, hopefully to lessen the impact of that incident or potentially even prevent that incident from ever happening. And perhaps the biggest takeaway is that we all know, and Jumpy mentioned earlier, that privacy is a big concern in all of these environments. We're seeing that the need for safe and secure environments starting to overtake the privacy concern, and now being really broadly accepted, video being really broadly accepted amongst all of the various stakeholders. So what does all of this mean for us? Well, as I mentioned, we're seeing a huge demand increase in video surveillance. We're also seeing advancements in the technology, higher resolution cameras, 360-degree cameras, all types of new use cases for these cameras, and a need for longer, increased retention times of stored video. We're also seeing the prices of a lot of these technologies come down. And what that is all leading to is an explosion in the amount of data that's being generated by IP video surveillance systems. There's a recent study out that said that IP video surveillance systems will generate more than 1,500 petabytes of new data every single day in 2017. Now, for reference, that is 3 times the amount of data that was being generated just 2 years ago in 2014. So we're seeing the amount of data being generated by video surveillance double roughly every 18 months. Additionally, another data point out there is that 50% of all of the data being produced by the Internet of Things will come from video surveillance in 2020. So not only are we generating huge amounts of data, but that data is more and more important to us than ever before. And what this means is now we can no longer tolerate failures or loss of data. Things like data loss, like system downtime, or the inability to access either live or recorded video can really lead to big problems within our institutions. They can have significant implications for us. Now, because of this, this has significant implications on our system infrastructure, on our servers and storage. And believe it or not, we are actually more susceptible to this type of failure, to this type of loss, than we ever have been before. So because of this increased data generation, because of the importance of video surveillance, and all of the other integrated security systems as well, video has really shifted, and really the broader security technology has shifted from being a very closed, proprietary, a niche, or a specialty type of system, that's stuck back in a closet somewhere. It's really shifted to becoming more of a mission critical application that's hosted typically inside of a data center and managed now by an IT department. Well, it's important to note this because oftentimes IT departments will turn to traditional technology for video and security system infrastructure, server and storage technology. But believe it or not, traditional infrastructure technology is really not well suited for video surveillance. And in fact, it can leave these systems prone to things like underperformance. Underperformance can drastically impact in a negative way the quality of the video that's being stored. And we all know in video surveillance, particularly in the modern high-definition IP video surveillance, image quality is a very, very important factor. You see an example of this on the left-hand side of the screen here. What can happen when a system doesn't perform well enough and how that can impact the quality of the image itself. Now, in addition to that, traditional IT solutions for resiliency, so for protecting against data loss and system downtime, traditional solutions there either don't work at all for video surveillance, or they can be prohibitively expensive. So IT will often turn to solutions like replication, like snapshots, like backup, like even RAID technology. And all of these are generally well accepted solutions in the world of of IT, but many of them would simply not work for video surveillance, or they can be extremely expensive to deploy. So to solve some of these new challenges, IT is starting to turn to new technologies and new infrastructure solutions. One of them on the left-hand side of the screen here is called flash storage. And flash can be a great solution for managing some of the big performance challenges that we have in our applications. And it's starting to become more of an attractive solution as things like data reduction technologies and even lower flash prices have made this type of storage more affordable for mainstream applications. But the other one I want to talk about a little bit more is kind of the latest and greatest buzzword in the world of IT. It's something called Hyper-Converged infrastructure, or HCI. Now, HCI is an attractive solution for IT because it eliminates a lot of the complexity and the cost and brings really enterprise-class technology and enterprise-class benefits at a much more affordable price point and in a much more simple manner. So what is hyperconverged infrastructure? What the heck does that mean? Well, at a very basic level, HCI combines highly proprietary, complex, very expensive server, data storage, and networking hardware together through software into a very simple appliance-based solution. HCI will leverage technologies like things called software-defined storage and server virtualization, and typically HCI is deployed on standard, off-the-shelf, open, non-proprietary server hardware. Now what this means for the end users is lower costs, much less complex solutions, and highly scalable infrastructure. So don't just take my word for it. There are a number of industry experts out there forecasting that this concept of software-defined storage and hyper-converged infrastructure will cause significant disruption in the traditional infrastructure industry. Just as a point of reference here, we're seeing what is today roughly a $40 billion a year industry of traditional storage infrastructure, really based on very expensive proprietary hardware. And you're seeing that transform into one that is now much more driven by software innovation and being deployed on low-cost, even commodity-type hardware. And one of the things I want you to take away from this, and you'll notice the orange section on the left-hand side of the screen, is that traditional storage industry really led and dominated by the companies that you've probably heard of, that you're somewhat familiar with, that you've probably seen inside of your data centers or your IT closets, and is transitioning to one that's led by software. The companies that are leading that transformation are not necessarily the big incumbent proprietary hardware providers that you are probably familiar with and used to. So a major change, a major shift, not only in the technology, but in the way that this technology and that these solutions are deployed. So Pivot 3 is a pioneer in the concept of hyper-converged infrastructure, and we have developed a solution now that is really purpose-built for video surveillance. I told you before that video surveillance can be a very challenging type of workload for traditional IT server and storage infrastructure. And in fact, the 360-degree camera technology that Jumbi talked about before is an example of one of the ways that traditional infrastructure can be really challenged. In addition to that, in education environments, in particularly college campuses or even school campuses with multiple different facilities, it can be a major challenge to capture or ingest, as we call, all of the video that's coming from these dozens or hundreds of cameras back into one place, into a server or a spinning disk of some sort, without loss. And in fact, in many cases, traditional infrastructure that's used for these types of applications can really lead to that data loss, which can cause all kinds of additional problems for us. So Pivot 3 has solved a lot of these problems with our video surveillance series solutions. So without going into too much of the technical details, which I won't do here, what we do is effectively bring the latest IT advancements, particularly around things called virtualized servers and virtual SAN storage, which is these together effectively make up hyper-converged infrastructure. And we bring it now in a very simple, a very scalable, and a very cost-effective package that most importantly is purpose-built for video surveillance. And what that means, the benefits that we deliver in a video surveillance environment, are a couple of things. First of all, we can deliver the highest levels of performance. And the reason that performance is important, it means that we can capture and store large amounts of video without ever dropping frames. And when dropped frames are what lead to image quality degradation, and it leads to the inability to use our video for what we need to use it for. Whether that be in a 360-degree camera application, or a video analytics application, or simply for being able to identify what happened or who did what inside of a particular event. Performance is the single most important aspect that's required to ensure that you can deliver that high-quality video. We also deliver very extreme levels of resiliency. And what that means is, now we go in and take steps to directly eliminate all of the things that we talked about before that we could no longer tolerate. So we eliminate system downtime. We eliminate data loss. We ensure that both live and recorded video is always available and always accessible, even when things go badly, even when hardware fails, even when you have major failures like the loss of an entire server. When these types of things happen, we ensure that the systems remain online, that your video remains recording, that you have access to live video, and that all of your stored video remains protected and accessible at all times. Our solutions are highly scalable, and what this means is you can start very, very small with maybe just a few cameras and a very small storage environment, and grow those systems as needs and budgets change over time very efficiently, very cost effectively, and in a way that is non-disruptive to your existing mission-critical applications. So we can grow to effectively infinite scale, multiple petabytes of storage and compute capacity in one location or in distributed environments. We also have a portion of our solution now that's really designed to address the challenge of mobility. And Jumbi addressed a little bit earlier the need for mobile access to video a little bit earlier today. But anyone that has a mobile device knows that accessing video, particularly high definition video, can sometimes be a challenge. And when you add to that things like integrated systems, like visitor management or access control or emergency communication, or maybe you have video systems from multiple different manufacturers, it can be a real challenge to mobilize those systems and access them in the field where you need them the most. We have solutions now that help you solve that challenge and can deliver fully functional mobile access to your fully integrated security suite, including your video, perhaps from multiple manufacturers, and even with integrated systems, to effectively any device in any location. We do it in such a way that reduces the amount of bandwidth and processing power that's required, and ensures that all of that critical sensitive data that you're storing remains securely stored inside of the data center and is never accessible in an unauthorized manner. And perhaps most importantly to all of this is we can deliver all of this enterprise class technology and this enterprise class value in a very simple, easy to deploy and easy to manage package. We have designed the complexity out of this enterprise class technology, and we ensure that advanced IT skills are not required either for deployment or for the ongoing day-to-day management. In fact, we talk about this really being a set it and forget it type of environment. Once it's set up and then running, there's very little that has to be done on a day-in, day-out basis. That's very different from traditional IT infrastructure solutions that often require highly trained, highly specialized people to manage them on a day-in and a day-out basis. So what all this really means to you, the ultimate value that we deliver with our hyper-converged infrastructure that is purpose-built for video surveillance, is that we help you reduce your risks and your costs without trading off between the two. And Rihanna, I think I'll turn it back over to you now.
Thanks so much, Brandon. Appreciate it. I'm going to open it up for questions. I'm going to take some time to look through the questions that have been submitted. But as I do that, I wanted to kind of open this up to both Jumpy and Brandon, and also anyone who's listening in who may have experience with both environments. If you want to, enter anything into chat or questions, what are the biggest differences between surveillance deployments between higher education environments and K through 12 environments? And Brandon, this is something you and I were talking about recently, and I think it's important to, kind of talk about what both of you are seeing in these specific segments. So, Brandon, maybe you could start out by providing your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, college and university campuses typically are larger environments. They tend to be large from a surveillance standpoint, tend to be larger systems. They're stored centrally, typically. Oftentimes in a data center with some type of IT department there or IT resource locally to manage them. K through 12 obviously will tend to be smaller systems, much more distributed. Now you talk about multiple different facilities spread out across a broader geographic area. Oftentimes they don't have a lot of local IT resource. In many cases they can't really do enterprise class technology, particularly with regards to their infrastructure. So that's where the idea of HCI or hyper-converged infrastructure can really be a benefit to both a smaller distributed K through 12 environment that can really start small and grow large over time, or even a larger centralized environment like a campus.
Great, thanks. Jumpy, any perspective on that and the differences that Oncam is seeing between those two environments?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Like Brandon was saying, what we find with K through 12 is there are a number of smaller facilities. For example, one school district I was working with recently has 15 schools, so low schools, middle schools, high schools, etc. And the infrastructure in all these different facilities is not necessarily networked and brought to a central location as it is in most higher ed kind of applications. And I think also, rather than just K through 12 versus higher ed, the other difference we find is really between public and private. Specifically with regards to budgets. Public, both K through 12 and higher ed, tend to roll infrastructure out at a much slower pace. They upgrade on a much slower pace. They, in general, have smaller budgets. so aren't able to avail of newer technologies perhaps as quickly as some of the more resource-rich private institutions.
Great, thank you. We talked a bit about growth and surveillance from a perspective of body cameras and Internet of Things, and I again pose this to both of you: is in the education environment, where are you seeing most growth? Are you seeing school campuses actually get behind deployments of body cameras for their on-campus police? Jumbi, I'll let you start with that one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think, the deployment of these, again, new technologies is really driven by the availability of budgets. And I think we've seen, most traction from all the different kinds of security technologies available. To be honest with you, video always seems to be on the top of the list because there is, of course, access control and stuff, but, there are a lot of schools that basically just use, key access and, it works well with them. But in large areas of pretty much all campuses, there's a massive urgent need for video.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well. We're starting to see that trend of body-worn cameras pick up, particularly in colleges and universities that may have local public safety or local police resources. And like I said before, they're taking some of the cues from general law enforcement for a couple of reasons. Number one, body-worn cameras are there to reduce use of force incidents in many cases, to protect the public and the stakeholders and the students and even the faculty and staff and other people, visitors on campus. But they're also being used by organizations to protect themselves against liabilities, right? We all know that policing and law enforcement is a very difficult job, and things never go the way that you tend to think that they will go. And body-worn cameras provide a record of what happened during an incident. They provide evidence that's typically undisputable and can protect educational institutions, colleges, universities, as well as law enforcement departments, as well as the public against some liabilities and other types of really bad things that can happen out of these incidents.
Okay, great. Thank you to both of you. Jimby, a question for you from one of the attendees about analytics with the Oncam cameras. Can you talk a little bit about the analytic reliability, analytics that are most used in the education space, kind of your experience with those sort of deployments?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the main analytic, to be honest with you, that people really ask most of the time on campuses is the ability to track particular individuals across campus. And, to be honest with you, that's really driven by, incidents of active shooters, etc., especially in, K through 12. And of course, as everyone knows, there are a lot of debates going on right now about personnel on campus being able to carry, guns, etc. But the ability to track an individual on campus is a big one. And perhaps the other big one is crowd alerts. There are a lot of incidents on campus related to crowds suddenly gathering for whatever reason. And the sooner that security personnel are alerted on crowd gathering on any part of campus, the sooner they'd be able to respond to any incidents, arising out of these crowds. And then, related to large events that happen on campus, counting seems to be quite important. So especially in a controlled area where an event is happening, people do want to keep track of, the number of people going in and out of the event. And of course, sometimes they do it with handheld clickers, but if they have cameras overlooking that area, they want to be able to just use the video to do that. So it's just a sampling of the kinds of applications we're running into.
Okay, thanks, Jumbi. Question for you, Brandon. In the school environment, as security, surveillance, and overall data becomes more important, the conversation behind the protection of this data, is that something that you find is common, or is it something that still has to kind of be addressed and I guess have a larger conversation about the value that video can bring, not just today, but also down the road?
Yeah, it's a very common concern. No doubt whenever you talk about video surveillance, particularly in public or semi-public types of environments, there's a concern around privacy, as we talked about, and that will always be the case. And of course, then there's a concern about if you have this information, this data that has some form of record of what happened, about me or about other people that have been in the premises on the premises. The concern is, how do we protect that data? Particularly since we've all seen the big, very public breaches of cloud services and other types of things like that, where we know that once data becomes stored somewhere, once it becomes digital, it can be a real challenge to protect it. So in this case in particular, because we're oftentimes talking about children, we're talking about other students and stakeholders in a university, this data is very, very sensitive. And because of one of the things that we both talked about earlier, the need to provide mobile access, which provides a real value, by the way. Providing mobile access to video is very valuable in helping our first responders mitigate incidents, cut down on the impact, maybe even stop them from happening in the first place. But we sort of balance that with how well we need to protect and secure that data and ensure that that very sensitive data is not somehow accessed by unauthorized people or in an unauthorized manner. So yeah, data security is absolutely a concern. It's one that we will continue to have to stay in front of.
Hey, Rihanna, this is Jumbi. If I could just add to that, just a funny anecdote. I was actually talking to the head of security at one of the big universities around here, and he said, data security is probably their biggest headache right now. But interestingly, what he did was he actually hired a bunch of hackers from the computer science department and got them to see how, basically hack into any of their security systems. And, he actually admitted that they were pretty successful at doing that. And then, of course, they went and addressed all of those issues. So, as we know, the common belief is that security systems, as in physical security systems, are not very secure in general. So this is certainly a big concern on campus as well.
That's a very good anecdote to share, Jumbi, and it definitely demonstrates the importance of addressing the issue for sure. So thank you. Thanks to both of you for sharing your perspective. That wraps up the questions we have, and I want to thank everyone for attending today. As I mentioned in the beginning, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on both companies' websites. And in addition, today's presentation served as a bit of a preview of an event both companies will be hosting in Chicago at the end of August that obviously will be called On Campus. We do have a number of other speakers that are joining us, including a well-known education consultant, an editor from one of the trade publications will be moderating. So if you're interested in learning more about that event, please visit either Oncam or Pivot3's website, or feel free to reach out to me directly and I can provide you with some more information. But Jumbi and Brandon, thank you to both of you for your time today, and we'll look forward to chatting with you all again soon.
Excellent. Thanks, Rihanna. Thanks all for attending.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.